That CPD show. My name is Chris and I'll be your host today. And today I'm joined on the island with Misheck Manhanha. Misheck is the AOG GB church planting lead for the UK. And after being the senior pastor of Riverside Family Church in Southampton, with a strong passion for seeing believers become disciples and disciples become witnesses, Misheck has been able to serve within various levels of church leadership and corporate leadership over the last 18 years. Misheck is married to Sharleen and they have 4 wonderful children who keep their home life very active and loud. Misheck, it's great to have you on the pod. Welcome.
Hey, Chris. Good to be here, man. Thank you for having me.
Brilliant. Well, I'm really excited to talk about some resources today. Before we do you want to just give us a quick update on church planting? I'd love to hear that from you. Where are things at? So I know it's a relatively new role for you, but how are things going?
Things are going really well. So we're currently, there's a last count, we're currently on 43 new church plants since May 2022. And it's just been an amazing journey of seeing the movement take up church planting. And I think there's only more to come on the back of it. So it's just a really significant time for us as a movement, as we're seeing God move. People who never thought they could plant churches are actually getting involved in church planting. We've done quite a bit of work on creating pathways, like training pathways, and obviously coming in 2024 will be a coaching pathway and several other opportunities to help pastors and leaders to get involved. So yeah, really exciting times, really exciting times.
Yeah, fantastic. That does sound actually really exciting. So I'm really excited to hear what's going to be happening in the future as well. So
yeah,
brilliant. All right. Well, should we talk desserts? Because obviously we are here to talk development, but first we must talk about dessert.
First things first, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Misheck, what's your dessert of choice?
See, I'm a simple guy. It's got to be sticky toffee pudding. However, it has to be sticky toffee pudding island. And let me explain. So you've got to put the sticky toffee pudding in the middle of the plate, evenly in the middle. On one side will be custard, and on the other side will be ice cream. So you got to have that nice balance of hot and cold, and then the sweetness in the middle. All of that mix. So that's how I would have it. So it's usual normal dessert, but slight twist in terms of how you lay it out.
So sticky toffee pudding. I mean, I'm for some reason I'm thinking of it as it's not a round dessert. It's normally a kind of, you get a spoonful of it and you put it in. So you've got to get it long enough to go across a bowl or a plate or some kind of thing.
Absolutely, and that's my justification for having a bigger portion. So so if it's one of those little small ones, you're gonna have to put 3 of them to really create the island. So I'm gonna get more portions on that.
Yes, I think I can get on board with this. I think it and mixing it with some kind of geographic thing, calling it an island, obviously dessert island development. I'm all in favor of this. I think this could be a highly winning dessert for the island.
Come on.
Absolutely. I know some people will balk at the idea of ice cream and custard on the same plate, because I this is not me, but for others, they may say that the ice cream and the custard will create a kind of a lukewarm middle.
No, you gotta it's the whole thing of, so you got to do it in a particular order. So you got to hit the custard, you hit the sticky toffee, hit the custard, and then have the topping with the ice cream and eat it that way. And just the fusion in your mouth when the hot and the cold and the sweet and the creamy, all of that just hits together. Trust me, it will be amazing. So don't knock it till you try it, is what I would say.
Well, I mean, the good thing is I am actually a big fan of, especially when I have it with custard, not custard, apple crumble with custard and ice cream. And I think custard and ice cream work together really well for that very reason. You get that little bit of cold works really, really well with the custard, but with a sticky toffee. Now we're talking, because now we've got that sort of that dark sweetness coming through as well from the dark sugar. And I think that's very good.
For me, with the ice cream, it just can't be, sometimes, you could the whole vanilla strawberry vibe, but sometimes for me, it's got to be the rum and raisin or ginger ice cream. So again, it
I've never had
brings.
ginger ice cream before.
Oh, dude, you've got to do it. You have got to do it. So we spent a lot of time in Devon. So we were part of a church in Devon. So yeah, ice cream was a big thing for us. And ginger ice cream. Oh my goodness, you got to do it. You've got to
Okay.
do it. Mm-hmm.
Well, I think that's yeah, definitely something to try. I'd love to try that. I think with the sticky toffee that would work very, very
That
well.
would work really well. So that, see, come on, man, we're on this.
we are indeed, absolutely. So that's sticky toffee pudding as an island with ice cream and custard. I'm all for that. I think that's a welcome addition to the island. I heartily
Brilliant.
approve. Excellent. All right, should we move on to your first resource? We are talking about resources as well,
Yeah,
not just
yeah.
desserts, as we could have talked the whole time about dessert. I think we would have been
Good.
happy with that. But we're here to talk about resources. So do you want to talk about the first resource that you've brought with you?
All right. So the first one is a book by an author called Dr. Harvey Kwiyani. So he's Malawian born, and the book is called Roots and Wings. Roots and Wings, and the idea behind it is primarily because it's come out of this thought in the last probably 30 years when there's been a massive diaspora immigration into the West from different parts of the world. And then also this realization that, 20, 30 years on, something has happened within the churches of first generation, migrants and first generation diaspora communities coming into the West, and realizing that their children are now, second gen children are failing to connect with what was first gen churches, and so he does a good job in putting language into that whole what has happened over that last 30 plus years period, because there was a mass exodus around mid 1990s to late 1990s, which saw millions of people migrate into the West from different parts of Africa and different parts of the world, and then so he does a good work in exploring that journey, and for most of these guys when they moved over, say if I can give GB or UK as an example, they would have moved over with the mindset that said, we're going to be here for about 2 years, we're going to work really hard for about 2 years, we're going to buy houses back home, and we're going to go back. That 2 years turned to 10, and 10 turned to 20, 30, 40 years, and lifetimes are being built here. And then obviously in that process, children come into the mix, and it's all okay whilst they're still very, very young. But then once they hit a certain point, everything begins to change in terms of the church being now the church for the parents and not their church. So because the church on Sunday is looking nothing like their realities on Monday through to Saturday. And then now it's a real contention is appearing in predominantly monocultural churches, where there's now this conversation of second gen. I'm actually a second gen myself. My parents are first gen pastors planting churches, around the country, and me being involved in all of that as well. But actually also hitting that point where I felt like this is not quite me. This is not quite fitting for where I'm going and what I feel is on my heart. And so Harvey does a good work in exploring that whole journey. And so churches that were planted with 2 years in mind, with the premise of, hey, let's do what we used to do back home. We would gather together, would sing songs, and after all, we're only here for a couple of years, and then we'll go back. And then so those are the foundations of some of these churches that are now still in existence 25, 30 years later, but are now struggling to reach out or to connect or to resonate with the second generation that is now coming in, which has now resulted in some ways a mass exodus of the second gen into the more contemporary church, because that feels more, there's a lot more resonance there. So for me, this book is quite a helpful tool, and I guess for me in several ways, because on one hand, I'm, as I said earlier on, I'm second gen, but on another hand, I'm also a pastor. So being able to lead churches and bring churches both from a monocultural setting as well as a multicultural setting, and navigating the conversation between first-gen parents who are trying to understand the dynamic that their second-gen children are going through, and wrestling with, what do you mean you don't want to go to church? That what's happening, so being able to sit in the middle and navigate the conversation well, because you can see both sides. This book has been very, very helpful for me in bringing language to it.
Yeah, I think it's fascinating because I think it brings into question, what is our ecclesiology? What do we believe around the church? And also, I think, Britain has a large population of people that have moved, so first generation, second generation. And how do you think churches, maybe speak for AOG churches, how could we be best set up to help people who are moving from other cultures, other nations, but also maybe it's speaking to those I don't know how many sort of first generation style churches we would have in Assemblies of God, but how could those kind of churches be set up best to still reach the people within their community and those kind of things? So I'm giving you two questions there, so let's hit the first one first. And thinking about, how can churches in Assemblies of God be best placed to reach people who are moving from other cultures, do you think?
I think that's a serious question, because in AOG we are seeing a massive number of those monocultural churches, and I think this is part of the reason why I really strongly feel that this book would be very helpful for a lot of pastors and leaders. The challenge you have with that is I'm not convinced we can adequately infuse a multicultural DNA in a church that's now been in existence, or a monocultural church that's been in existence for a very long time, 25, 30 years. Because what you'll find is, as a pastor of that church, you will face significant resistance from the first gen stronghold that's been there. This is their source of life. This is what brings community to them, because they don't have the versatility to enter into this multicultural dynamic when it comes to their God outlook. So there's that real tension there, that real challenge. So to give you a classic example, there was a church in Leeds that I was working with closely around this subject, trying to look at, is there a way that we can really get get one church that's going to be, have the first gen very willing to adjust, because that's where the adjustment needs to come. It's got to come from the first gen. But ultimately, we landed on a place where they've had to look at a different church, which is going to be multicultural in its essence, because the first gen just won't move. So even stuff like language. So the language piece is a big deal when it comes to expression of faith and encounter with God, and to then say to them, well, you're going to have to shift that and change that in order for it to facilitate a multicultural, multi-generational church. That's a big ask. I'm not saying it's impossible, but actually for a lot of the guys, they've just resorted to replanting churches that have multicultural and multi-generational foundations within them, and primarily being led by second gen, preferably, because I think that's another piece. In some cases, that has been very helpful, identifying a few second gen leaders who are able to then navigate through a multicultural congregation. So I think that there's a real conversation to be had, and I'll be very, very keen to engage with several other leaders across our movement, monocultural first gen leaders, and discuss how we can really outwork a church that is not just for first gen, but actually is for multi generations. And part of the reason why Dr. Harvey titles the book Roots and Wings is this whole idea that we're not saying uproot yourself from your heritage, from who you are. So the roots still need to go deep enough in terms of your own African heritage, your own Asian heritage, your own, whatever heritage you're from. They're going deep enough to pick up the nutrients that make you who you are, but at the same time have the wings to be able to spread wide and really harness all of the opportunities that come with living life in the West. So it's that whole concept of deep roots that bring up the healthy nutrients of who you are, the culture that you're coming from, and also spanning the wings that come with grabbing hold of different opportunities, missional opportunities, economical opportunities for you as a diaspora community.
And I think this has got a challenge for the predominantly white churches in the UK as well. When we're thinking about that kind of the homogenous unit principle, as it's known. There's a lot of churches that are maybe predominantly white, or like you said, the sort of first generation churches that might be predominantly one particular culture. What do you think that they can learn, and what is the goal? What do you think is the aim that even if you take a predominantly white ethnic church, what do you think that would be a good goal for them to think about in terms of the multicultural nature of the UK that we're moving into? What do those kind of churches need to think about?
I think it's got to. We all have to lay down our own cultures and really subscribe to the kingdom culture. And I think the kingdom really enables us to find a place at the table, because what you tend to find in some of the contemporary churches that you just referred to, in some cases it's a notion that says, come and be part of us as long as you become like us. So you can't bring your heritage as such in its fullness. Can you bring a palatable version of your heritage, which would just slot into what we're already doing? But actually, if we both lay down what we think are these defining cultures, and they just become a smaller part of the bigger thing, which is kingdom. How do I still embrace who I am? I'm born in Zimbabwe, pretty much grew up over here. Embrace who I am, but at the same time, be so focused on the mission of God for this nation that my heritage is not the loudest voice, but my missional outlook is the loudest voice. I think that missional outlook becoming the same, whether you're white, you're black, you're Asian, I think that would be a big win. Now the big question is, how do you create a church environment that enables that to become the focal point for everybody to find space to bring that in?
And I think it's getting into that, what the Apostle Paul was talking about. There's neither Jew nor Greek,
right?
And understanding what does that mean. And sometimes we can just put that into when we're talking about salvation. I think we're talking more than just. I think Paul's talking more than just salvation. He's talking about what it means to be church as well.
Yeah.
That when it's not about Jewish culture or Greek culture, it's about an in Christ culture. Is what it's
absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely right. And I think that's the win. That will be the win, because I remember a number of years ago, part of the discussions I had with different leaders when during COVID and everything that happened then, and there was this whole idea of how do I create a church environment that will enable everybody to find belonging. And I basically said, for a lot of these diaspora communities, they came with, one, food. Their food is very important. So the food was a key player in how they would emigrate to another country. And then also their worship. Their worship is a key part. And obviously this would ultimately shape their perception of God. So their God view would come out of that. So if you one of the challenges I used to just set was, in our church in Southampton, we had about 15 different nationalities, and then I made it my own personal assignment to engage with their worship dynamic, worship music, in their own native languages, and the goal was, can I access the presence of God through their worship, in spite of the language barrier? But is there something in this worship experience that would enable me as a pastor to begin to engage with the reality of God through their worship? And that effort alone put me in a position where I had to also start to think about their outlook and their perception when they look at the band in front, leading worship, and how is that communicating their involvement in the life of the church? So that was a big conversation. And then the other piece was food. So every time you'd have those, international days and all of that stuff, and you've got people coming around, it was so important to me to try every single person's food. And they would all come, Pastor, could you try this? And could you try that? And literally I really made that commitment. Nobody asked me to do it. I made a conscious decision as the pastor of a multicultural church that my palate would also now become diverse and multicultural, because I'm aware of the importance of food in a diaspora community.
Yeah, that's brilliant. I mean, I can certainly say from a personal aspect that the missions Sunday that I have at my own church, where we try all the different types of food, is probably my favorite Sunday.
You can't go wrong, man.
It's a wonderful thing. I feel like we could talk for another hour on this book, and
Easily, yeah.
And so maybe we're gonna have to pick up another time about it. That's Roots and Wings by Dr. Harvey Kwiyani. And a fascinating resource that and would definitely recommend that people check that one out. Should we go on to your second resource though?
Yes, second one is called Disruptive Thinking by the legend that is Bishop T.D. Jakes.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, right. You gotta have a bit of Bishop in there somewhere.
Well, yes,
so
I think.
Yeah,
go for it. Well, I was going to say we've all heard of the Bishop T.D. Jakes, but talk to us about Disruptive Thinking, because I've not heard of this book.
Yeah, so it's one of his newer books, but I really love it because I think for me it spoke mainly into my current reality, at least my most recent reality, shifting and moving around, and basically the whole premise is around embracing change, and the emphasis that the bishop tries to make in this is he says it's very important to embrace change rather than fear change, and then I think the change in that posture, or the differences in those two postures, ultimately dictates how you engage with change. And he basically just says whenever you see change, it's got to become an opportunity for growth and innovation rather than a threat. And that whole phrase for me just, yeah, that's become very, very helpful for me in how I view change and how I embrace change. So even to the point where with my family, so we moved from Doncaster to Devon, and we're in Devon for a number of years, and then from Devon to Southampton, and then from Southampton to now in Manchester. So all of those moves, with all of their challenges and with all of their difficulties for us as a family, the reality is this book really helped me in not only just leading myself through change, but also leading my family through change, and understanding that, that there are significant opportunities for growth and innovation that are coming through this very difficult, very challenging, position of changing environment, changing schools. So, for example, when we moved from Southampton to Manchester, there was a time in my household probably where I was the most disliked person, because it's like the whole idea of the children saying, "How are you? We're moving school, we're leaving our friends, and we're, it's because of you. It's because of this thing that you do." And that was very difficult, because on one hand, it's this notion of, gosh, God, you got to come through in this situation, because I don't want my children's perception of you to be associated with this idea of being disrupted every single time. But at the same time, that's actually very important, that whole idea of disruptive thinking, to say, what does it actually look like to follow God, to be willing to live your life for God? I don't think we can authentically live life to following God without disruption. Disruption is inevitable. So now, 18, 19 months later, speaking to my children and seeing how they're thriving in their school and making new friends, and also, by the way, changing their accent to a northern accent. What on earth is that all about? Oh gosh. So it's all of those dynamics coming in, and then sitting down with them and say, look, Do you still think God is mean? Do you still think this was a bad idea? And then just hear all of them unanimously say, oh, this is great. You know, I've got new friends. I've met new people. And I never would have met these people. I never would have been in this great school if we'd stayed where we were. So again, journeying both myself and my family through this whole idea of embracing change rather than fearing it. This book has been brilliant. And I guess also in church leadership, it's a no-brainer. You know, we know that change is inevitable. So how we view it through this idea of embracing disruptive thinking, I think it's a great resource, a great tool.
Yeah, absolutely. I think you know, in the church world, I think for every minister that's listening, you know, change is not just a good thing; it's a necessary, thing. You're either changing or you're declining. Is really how it is. And so, you know, embracing change as a church, but also embracing change personally. I think that's what stood out to me from what you just said there. Is that you know, I'm very good at being able to embrace change from a church aspect of things.
Right.
You know, that you know, that's part of my normal life. But sometimes, you know, following the call of God, that can feel a bit more difficult because that involves a lot of change and a lot of not sure where we're going. Rather like yourself, which is very much, you know, moving different places, but sometimes that can be, you know, taking on different roles or different things. And it's actually something I've been reflecting on personally, which is that, you know, the call of God is a bit like Abraham's journey. You know, just go in that direction, and you know, he never settles anywhere. He goes on the journey, and so he's constantly changing and moving location. He's in Shechem, and he's down in the Negev, and then he's up here, and he's down there, and he's always constantly moving. He's in Egypt for a while, then he's back in the land of Canaan and again, and that constant movement is, you know, that's following the call of God, really. And so and I think that resonates, you know, and that constant change, God's consistently sort of disrupting him, and you have to get used to that disruptive thinking. So I certainly resonate with that on a personal life, and it seems like for you that's as well, that's been a very very impactful for you personally, and those kind of things.
Absolutely. I mean, I probably would say the personal growth and expansion within myself as an individual, that I've actually felt in the last 18 to 19 months is probably the most I've felt in a very, very long time. Again, it's all within the framework of this disruption, embracing the disruption. I remember when this opportunity came up to seriously consider the church planting role, and if I'm being honest, I'd already said no in my mind, because I knew that there was going to be significant disruption. There's going to be significant upheaval for just not just me, but for my family, and even for the local church that we were leading. All of those things were going to play a significant part. But change through this understanding of actually being disruptive thinking and embracing change rather than fearing it. I couldn't be where I'm at now. I couldn't be who I am now without embracing it. And that begs the question: how many other realities in our lives are we forfeiting because we're choosing to fear change rather than embracing that change?
Yeah. What would you say to a minister listening to this that knows that their church or there's something, you know, personally in their life needs to change, but they're just scared to make it? What would you say to that person?
Well, honestly, I probably would say that for me, let me answer it by talking a little bit about what I've had to go through. Until the time I genuinely believed that God had great plans for me, in spite of what they might initially look like, in spite of the disruption and the challenges that might initially present themselves, until that point, I genuinely had the revelation of the goodness of God for me. That point became the catalyst in terms of how I now face change. So even to the point where with my own children and my family now, we know that if God says move to China, we are going to move to China. You know, it's going to, yes, there are difficulties. Yes, there are all these things in them. All of this is underpinned by the fact that we know that God's plans for us are great plans, regardless of what the difficulty is. The difficulty is inevitable, but his heart for us is great, is wonderful. He's got great plans for us. So that's not something that just comes from somebody speaking it to you. That has to be a knowing through revelation. And I think that's got to be the starting point to whoever is listening to any pastor or leader who says, how do I go through this? So instead of saying, let me just jump into the change, I think pursue after this revelation of God, this direct knowledge through revelation from God that says, imparting to me your heart for me. And I think when that lands, the decision to enter into change becomes at least easier. It doesn't become completely easy, but at least it becomes easier because you know his heart for you.
Fantastic. Great. So that's Disruptive Thinking by Bishop T.D. Jakes. Should we move on to your final resource?
Final one is, of course, we're in church planting world, so we've got to bring in something a little bit like that. So this book is called Multiplication, and it's by a guy called Nick Klinkenburg. Great book. And again, he does a great work on bringing down, making multiplication very accessible to all of us, really. And one of the models that I probably want to talk about, and I know many people would be aware of this, is this multiplication model that is accessible at every level of church leadership. And it's this whole idea of I do, you watch; I do, you help; you do, I help; you do, I watch, and then transition happens and handover takes place. That particular model is something that I've used personally within local church leadership, and also assigning every department head to do exactly the same, and also encouraging their teams to do exactly the same. So going from multiplying myself and then also multiplying the teams and then multiplying the sub teams just meant that this whole notion of multiplication is not an intangible quotient, but actually it's become something of a lived reality that is accessible by anybody and everybody. And I think that's become very helpful in terms of how I look at multiplication and how I process through the idea of spreading. So when we look at how AOG, as AOG, we're looking to plant several churches and see many souls won to Christ, through church planting, and seeing the gospel infused in our nation through church planting. Multiplication is going to be a key part in this whole process. And this resource just breaks it down. It really just breaks it down and says, makes it very accessible to every single one of us. Yeah.
I think that the one of the limiting factors for so many churches is the development of leaders, isn't it? And something as simple as that, I do, you watch; I do, you help; then you do, I help; and then you do, I watch; and then you do. Finally, that's so simple, but yet so powerful.
Absolutely, yeah.
There's something obviously that for many ministers that there's something that stops them from doing something like that. What do you think are those sort of limiting factors, or maybe limiting beliefs that do you think they're stopping people?
I truly believe multiplication. A key ingredient for multiplication is letting go of control. I think that's a very, very crucial part. If we're going to shift from addition to multiplication, I think there's got to be a real sense of being okay not being in control of everything, and actually high trust in the people that you're multiplying into and the people who are multiplying themselves. So that idea of, and then that's a challenging thing, because church leadership is difficult. There's significant moments of heartbreak and being let down and all of those things. They're all in the mix of it, but actually still coming back to the place where you make a decision to let go of control. And obviously we can talk a little bit more about what that actually looks like, but it's the idea of letting go of control and elevating trust. And I think that really helps to create an atmosphere that encourages multiplication. And you're right, several people say, I get that concept, I can see it, it's really powerful, but I'm just not doing it. I'm just not getting it done, you know. And I think it's sometimes it's the control aspect as well as this high trust element that can make a difference.
Well, let's dive into that idea of control then. What do you think is that issue around that control that's stopping people from multiplying? What is it that keeps people from needing to have control in, you know, maybe it's in a ministry or even, you know, in terms of being able to release a leader? And how can a church leader, church minister, how can they let go of control that will produce that multiplication?
I think there's several things at play there, Chris. You've got this idea of identity being too intertwined with the authority that we carry over whatever, whether it's the church or, you know. So once my identity is intertwined with everything to do with church planting right now, that becomes a challenge for me to let go. So I've got a team of about 10 people now, and my primary objective right now has been to push down all of the resources I have to make them the first port of contact rather than everybody coming through me. And then there's a root sense of, you could easily get sucked into this whole idea of feeling very important because everybody is coming directly to you. But actually, when you decide genuinely to push down a resource and not just give people tasks or whatever, but actually give them responsibility and authority to get things going and get things moving and get people coming to them, that releases me to do the things that only I need to do. And I think that's the key part there, to say most of the things that we find ourselves being bogged down with as leaders, as pastors, most of those things could actually be given to other people to really crack on with. And if we're getting to that place where we're okay to let go of those things, it means that we've got clarity on what the one thing or the two things are that we should be focused on. I think that would really help to push the rest of it down. And that's part of this control and authority piece.
It's one of the things I remember hearing from Craig Rochelle, which really challenged me. And he said, if someone can do it 50% as well as you can, then you should give it to them to do.
There you go. Yeah, right. And that's really challenging because, again, it means if that whole identity piece comes back into it, you're thinking, oh gosh, okay, so if I'm the church planting director and everybody's now speaking to all these other church planting catalysts across the country, you know, whether it's mapping, whether it's resources, whether, you know, so, you know, I've been used to everybody coming to me, and there's a queue of people wanting to talk to me, and you know, and there's this pseudo identity that comes with that. And you have to die, you have to literally die to yourself from all of that and just say, you know, this is not, here's the key question. Am I, or rather, is this model, is this format the best format to best serve the church? Or is this actually, you know, bottlenecking the resources that could really be widespread in the church? And it really, I think, shifting to that question and being honest in your answers would really help to, you know, maybe to come to the place where you have to let go and say, well, okay, I'm going to push it through. Of course, you've got to be wise. You've got to get the, you know, put it in with to the right people and all of that stuff. But I think sometimes that very reasoning can become the reason why we actually don't do it in the end. And it's trying to manage it and make sure we, like you said, 50%, you know, there you go, end it over.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's Multiplication by Nick Klinkenburg, which I think probably makes the kind of the custard side of the dessert, and Roots and Wings probably the ice cream. With that disruptive thinking is the island in the middle, isn't it? There's the thing that joins those two together. You know, it's about, you know, if we're going to think about, you know, Roots and Wings, if we're going to be thinking about how do we reach first and second generation people in our nation and not be just, you know, thinking about, you know, those homogenous units. But also, if we're going to multiply, the thing that's going to be in the center of that, disruptive thinking, embracing change.
Brilliant.
So
Absolutely.
three fantastic resources there, and I'm surprised how well it actually matched your rather excellent dessert. So, Misheck, thank you so much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed chatting through those resources, and I really encourage people to check those out. So, Misheck, thank you so much.
It's been an honor, Chris. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you for listening to this episode of That CPD Show. For more episodes, why not subscribe and give us a review? It really helps us out. See you next time.